In the quiet veil of night, when voices fade and the world grows still, this is where hearts speak. Welcome to Of Night Dews, a place for stories that ache, soften, and awaken. Let your soul rest here a while and listen. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. O Allah, open to us the doors of your mercy. Allow your thoughts to settle. Let the worries of the day grow distant. Let your breathing become slow and gentle. And as the world around you becomes quieter, let us travel together to a different time. There are stories that inspire hope. There are stories that teach patience. And then there are stories that remind us that faith is worth more than life itself. Tonight's story is one of those. It is not a legend, nor a tale passed down through generations without certainty. It is an authentic narration told by our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, preserved in Sahih Muslim. It tells of a people who lived long before Islam reached the Arabian Peninsula. People whose names have faded from history, yet whose faith remains an everlasting lesson. The Quran briefly mentions them as the companions of the ditch. The Prophet, peace be upon him, unfolded the story behind those verses. So tonight, let us journey back to a forgotten kingdom, a land ruled by fear, a throne built upon arrogance, and a young boy whose faith would change an entire nation. Long before the coming of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there lived a powerful king. His authority stretched across the land. His commands were obeyed without question, and his people lived beneath his rule. To strengthen his hold over the kingdom, the king relied upon a court magician. The magician was no ordinary entertainer. His craft helped maintain the king's influence over the people, surrounding the throne with mystery and fear. But time spares no one. The magician grew old. His hands were no longer as steady as before, and he knew his life was nearing its end. One day, he stood before the king and said, I have become old. Send me a young boy, so that I may teach him my knowledge. The king agreed. Among the people, a young boy was chosen. Every day, the boy traveled from his home to learn from the aging magician. His future seemed decided. He would inherit the magician's knowledge. He would serve the king. He would become another pillar, supporting the kingdom's falsehood. But Allah had decreed a different path for him, one that neither the king nor the magician could ever imagine. On the road between his home and the palace sat a monk, away from the noise of the city, away from the ambitions of kings. The monk devoted himself to worshiping Allah. One day, curiosity led the boy to stop. He listened. The monk spoke not of power, not of wealth, not of fear. He spoke of the Creator, of truth, of worshiping Allah alone. The words settled gently into the boy's heart. The next day, he stopped again, and the day after that. Soon it became his habit. Every journey to the palace included a visit to the monk. The more he listened, the more his heart changed. Yet every delay came with a price. The magician grew angry. Why are you late? The boy was struck for arriving after the appointed time. When he returned home late, his family questioned him as well. Caught between two worlds, the boy sought advice from the monk. The monk gently said, when you fear the magician, tell him that your family delayed you. And when you fear your family, tell them that the magician delayed you. Not to deceive for personal gain, but to protect the fragile journey of faith that had only just begun. Every day, the boy continued walking between two teachers. One taught illusion, the other taught truth. One served a king, a human. The other served Allah, the creator of all, including the humans. And with every passing day, his heart leaned further towards the light. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. The boy continued along the same familiar path. Each morning, he would leave his home, visit the monk to hear words that nourished his soul, and then continue on to the palace, where the old magician waited to teach him his craft. Outwardly, little had changed, yet within his heart, everything was changing. He had begun to see the difference between deception and truth, between the fleeting power of this world and the everlasting power of Allah. Then one day, Allah decreed that the truth hidden within the boy's heart would be tested. As he made his journey, he found a great beast blocking the road. The people could go no farther. Travelers stood waiting. No one dared approach it. The path had come to a standstill. The boy looked upon the frightened crowd. Then he looked at the stone lying on the ground before him. A thought crossed his mind. Today, I will know which path is truly beloved to Allah. Was the magician upon the truth, or was the monk? The answer could not be found in arguments. It could only come from Allah. The boy bent down and picked up a stone. He raised his hands in sincere supplication. "O Allah, if the way of the monk is more beloved to you than the way of the magician, then cause this beast to die so that the people may pass." There was no audience to impress, no desire for fame, only a heart seeking certainty. He threw the stone. By Allah's permission, it struck the beast. The creature collapsed. The road was opened. The people passed safely once again. The boy stood in silence. It was not the stone that had brought victory, nor was it his own strength. Only Allah possesses such power. And Allah had answered him. He hurried to the monk and told him everything that had happened. The monk listened carefully. He did not rejoice with pride. He did not claim the miracle for himself. Instead, he looked at the young boy with wisdom born from years of worship. "My dear son, today you have surpassed me." The words were not spoken from jealousy. Rather, they reflected the monk's recognition that Allah had granted the boy a special station. Then his expression became serious. "I can see that you will soon be put to trial. If that day comes, do not reveal who I am." The warning settled quietly upon the boy's heart. He had sought certainty. Allah had granted it. But certainty often comes before hardship. Faith is not only strengthened through blessings, it is also refined through trials. The boy did not yet know how soon those words would come true. As time passed, Allah honored the young believer with remarkable signs. People who were blind came seeking help. Those afflicted with severe illnesses came to him. Even those suffering from leprosy sought him out. Yet the boy never claimed any power for himself. Whenever someone came hoping to be healed, he would remind them of the truth. "I do not cure anyone. It is Allah who cures." His hands were only raised in supplication. The healing belonged entirely to Allah. Word of these extraordinary events spread throughout the kingdom. Eventually, the news reached one of the king's closest companions. This courtier had once enjoyed honor and influence, but he had lost his eyesight. He had likely exhausted every remedy the kingdom could offer. Now, hearing of the young man, hope stirred once again. He gathered many valuable gifts. Perhaps he believed they would persuade the boy to help him. When he arrived, he placed the gifts before him and said, "If you cure me, all of these gifts shall be yours." The boy gently replied, "I do not cure anyone. It is Allah who cures." Then he invited him to something far greater than restored eyesight. "If you believe in Allah, I shall supplicate to him for your cure." The choice before the courtier was no longer about blindness. It was about faith. Would he continue relying upon the kingdom and its false claims? Or would he turn to the Lord of all creation? His heart accepted the truth. He believed in Allah. Then the young man raised his hands and supplicated. Allah answered. The man's sight returned. The darkness that had covered his eyes was lifted. Yet an even greater darkness had already been removed from his heart. He left seeing the world with new eyes. Not only the eyes of his body, but the eyes of faith. Soon afterward, the courtier returned to the royal court. He took his usual place beside the king. The king looked toward him. Something was different. His eyes, once blind, now saw clearly. The king asked, "Who restored your sight?" Without hesitation, the man answered, "My lord." The king frowned. "Do you have a lord besides me?" The courtier replied with words that would forever separate truth from falsehood. "My lord, and your lord, is Allah." Silence filled the court. Those words struck harder than any weapon. The king could tolerate many things, but he could not tolerate someone denying the false divinity upon which his kingdom stood. His anger erupted. He ordered the man to be seized. He was tortured, pressed again and again, until, overcome by the pain, he revealed the name of the young boy. The storm that the monk had foreseen had finally begun. The king's command spread quickly through the palace. "Bring me the young man," the boy who had once walked quietly through the streets, the boy who had once sat at the feet of an old monk, now stood before the ruler of the land. The king looked upon him with suspicion. Reports had reached him from every direction. The blind were seeing. The sick were recovering. The people were speaking of miracles. And they all pointed to this young man. The king said, "I have heard that your magic has become so great that you heal the blind, those afflicted with leprosy, and others besides them." The young man answered with the same truth he had spoken to everyone else. "I do not cure anyone. It is Allah who cures." There was no hesitation in his voice, no attempt to protect himself, only the truth. The king's face hardened. He ordered that the boy be seized. The torture began. Pain was inflicted upon him. Again and again he was questioned. Again and again he was pressured, until at last, under unbearable torment, the boy revealed the monk. The trial the monk had foretold had arrived, not because the boy lacked faith, but because Allah, in his wisdom, decreed that the story would unfold exactly as it did. The monk was brought before the king. Years of worship had left their mark upon him. His life had been one of quiet devotion, far from the halls of power, far from the praise of people. Now he stood before the throne. The king gave him only one choice: abandon your religion. The monk refused. There were no lengthy speeches, no arguments, no negotiations, only steadfastness. The king ordered for a saw to be brought. It was placed upon the middle of the monk's head. Then it was drawn downward. The prophet, peace be upon him, told us that he was split into two halves. His body fell, but his faith did not. He had remained true to Allah until his final breath. Then the king summoned the courtier, whose sight Allah had restored, the same man who had once lived in comfort within the palace. The same man who had confessed, "My Lord and your Lord is Allah." The king demanded, "Renounce your religion." The answer was the same. He refused. Another saw was brought. Once again, the punishment was carried out. He too was martyred. 2 righteous believers had now returned to their Lord. The palace floor had become a place where truth was purchased with blood. Yet even now, the king had not achieved what he desired. The young man still remained. Again, the boy stood before the king. Perhaps the king imagined that witnessing such horrifying deaths would weaken him. Perhaps fear would finally overcome faith. Again came the command, "Turn back from your religion." Again came the refusal. The boy would not abandon the Lord who had guided him. The king chose another path. If he will not change his belief, then remove him. He handed the boy over to a group of his soldiers. "Take him to such and such mountain. Climb to its summit. If he refuses to abandon his religion, throw him from the top." The soldiers obeyed. They led the young believer away from the palace. The city disappeared behind them. The climb became steeper, higher and higher, until they reached the summit. Below them stretched the earth. One push, and no human being could survive such a fall. The soldiers gave him one final opportunity. "Renounce your faith. Save your life." The boy answered not with anger, nor with panic. He turned instead to the one who controls every mountain and every stone. He supplicated, "O Allah, save me from them, in whatever way you will." Nothing more. He left the manner of his rescue entirely to Allah. Then, by Allah's command, the mountain began to tremble. The ground shook beneath the soldiers' feet. The rocks beneath them shifted. Balance was lost. One after another, they fell from the mountain. Only the young believer remained unharmed. When the earth became still once more, he simply stood up and walked back. He returned to the king alive. The king stared in disbelief. "What happened to your companions?" The young man replied with calm certainty, "Allah saved me from them." No boast, no pride, only gratitude to his Lord. Yet the king's heart grew only harder. He would make another attempt. And Allah had already decreed that an even greater sign was about to unfold. The king could scarcely believe what stood before him. The young man had returned, alive. The mountain had failed. The soldiers who had been entrusted with the task had not succeeded too. Still, the king refused to reflect upon what he had witnessed. A heart consumed by arrogance seldom accepts even the clearest signs. Instead, he devised another plan. He summoned a different group of his courtiers. "Take him with you," the king commanded. "Carry him in a boat until you reach the middle of the sea. Then call him to abandon his religion. And if he refuses, throw him into the water." The soldiers accepted the order. The boy was taken from the palace once more. This time, the road did not lead upward into the mountains. It led toward the open sea. Soon, the shoreline disappeared behind them. Nothing could be seen but the endless water stretching toward the horizon. The boat drifted farther from land. When they reached the place the king had intended, they demanded once again, "Abandon your religion." The answer did not change. The boy's trust had never rested upon the mountain, nor did it now rest upon the sea. He raised the same sincere supplication, "O Allah, save me from them, in whatever way you will." The words were simple, yet they carried complete reliance upon the Lord of the worlds. Then Allah answered. The boat overturned. The waves swallowed those who sought to kill him. The sea that had appeared to offer no escape became, by Allah's command, the means of his rescue. And once again, the young believer returned, walking, alive. He stood before the king for a second time. The king looked upon him in astonishment. "What happened to your companions?" The young man replied, "Allah saved me from them. Nothing more, nothing less." The king had exhausted his strength. The mountain had failed. The sea had failed. No matter what he planned, Allah's decree prevailed. Then the young man spoke. Perhaps for the first time, he offered the king advice, not to save his own life, but to fulfill a far greater purpose. He said, "You will never be able to kill me until you do what I tell you." The king leaned forward. Years of power had taught him to command others. Now, for the first time, the prisoner was giving instructions. "What is it?" the king asked. The young man answered, "Gather all of the people. Bring them together in an open place. Tie me to the trunk of a tree. Then take an arrow from my quiver. Place it in the bow, and before you release it, say, 'In the name of Allah, the Lord of the young boy.' Only then will you be able to kill me." The king agreed. Messengers spread throughout the kingdom. The people gathered. Men, women, children, all came to witness what they expected would be another execution. Perhaps they wondered why this ordinary young man had survived every attempt upon his life. Perhaps they had already begun to question the claims of the king. No one knew that this day would change the history of their nation. The young man was tied to the trunk of a tree. He stood peacefully. There was no struggle, no attempt to escape. He had willingly chosen this path, not because he desired death, but because he desired something greater, that the people should know their true Lord. The king took an arrow from the young man's own quiver. He placed it upon the bowstring. For a brief moment, everything grew still. Then, exactly as the young man had instructed, the king declared before the entire gathering, "In the name of Allah, the Lord of the young boy." Those words echoed across the plain. Perhaps the king imagined they were only a formality. Perhaps he believed they carried no meaning. But every person present heard them. The ruler who had claimed lordship over his people had just proclaimed another lord. He released the arrow. It flew through the air. By Allah's decree, it struck the young man upon his temple. He calmly placed his hand upon the place where the arrow had struck. Then he returned to his Lord. For a heartbeat, silence covered the gathering. Then voices began to rise, not one, not a handful. But the people together cried out, "We believe in the Lord of the young boy. We believe in the Lord of the young boy. We believe in the Lord of the young boy." The king had succeeded in killing one believer, but by Allah's wisdom, he had guided an entire nation to faith. The very plan intended to extinguish belief had become the means by which belief spread throughout the land. Allah had fulfilled his decree. No king, no army, no throne could prevent it. The voices of the people echoed across the plain. "We believe in the Lord of the young boy." Again they proclaimed it. "We believe in the Lord of the young boy." For years the king had demanded that people acknowledge him above all else. Yet in a single moment, his own words had undone everything he had built. He had spoken the name of Allah before the entire kingdom. He had admitted, with his own tongue, that the young boy had a Lord. And when the arrow struck only after those words were spoken, the people understood. The young man had spoken the truth. The king had witnessed the signs, and Allah alone possesses all power. The king's courtiers hurried to him. Their faces were filled with alarm. They said, "Do you see? The very thing you feared has happened. The people have believed in the Lord of the young boy." The king had wanted complete control. Instead, his kingdom had awakened. His anger burned hotter than ever before. If he could no longer prevent people from believing, he would make belief unbearably costly. He issued a dreadful command. At the entrances of the roads, great trenches were dug, long, deep, and wide. Then wood was piled within them. The fires were lit. The flames rose high into the sky. The heat spread across the land. The smoke darkened the air. What had once been ordinary roads became places of judgment. One by one, the believers were brought forward. Each was given the same choice: abandon your faith or enter the fire. There was no third path. Some were thrown into the blazing trenches. Others were commanded to leap in themselves. The king believed fear would defeat faith, but he discovered something he had never understood. Faith rooted in certainty cannot be burned away. One believer after another remained steadfast. They surrendered their lives rather than surrender their Lord. The fire consumed their bodies, but it could not consume their belief. Among those brought forward was a woman. In her arms, she carried her young child. She approached the edge of the blazing trench. The flames roared before her. She looked into the fire. Then she looked down at the little one she held close. For the first time that day, her steps slowed. Not because she doubted Allah, not because she wished to return to disbelief. She was a mother. Her heart trembled for the child in her arms. Every mother longs to protect her child from pain, to shield them from harm, to carry their suffering instead of allowing them to face it. She hesitated, only for a moment. Then, by a miracle from Allah, the infant spoke. The Prophet, peace be upon him, narrated his words. "O my mother, be patient, for indeed you are upon the truth." The child had not yet reached an age to speak, yet Allah, who caused Isa ibn Maryam to speak in the cradle, caused this infant to speak as well, not to astonish the people, but to strengthen the heart of a believing mother. Her hesitation vanished. She knew with certainty that whatever awaited beyond the flames was infinitely better than turning away from Allah. And so she remained steadfast. She chose the truth, even at the cost of her own life. This is where the Prophet, peace be upon him, ended the story. He did not tell us the names of the king, the monk, or the young boy. He did not tell us the name of the kingdom, because the lesson was never tied to a place, nor to a people. It was meant for every generation that would hear these words, generations who would learn that power belongs to Allah alone. That guidance cannot be chained by kings. That truth is not measured by numbers. And that sincere faith, even in the heart of a single young believer, can become the means by which Allah guides an entire nation. The Quran remembers these believers with only a few powerful verses. Cursed were the companions of the trench, the fire, full of fuel, when they sat by it, watching what they did to the believers. They resented them for no reason, except that they believed in Allah, the Almighty, the Praiseworthy. Their enemies are remembered for their cruelty, but the believers are remembered for their steadfastness. The king possessed an army. The believers possessed only faith. History remembers which one endured. As our journey comes to an end tonight, perhaps each of us can quietly ask ourselves a simple question. When life places us between comfort and truth, between fear and faith, which path will we choose? The young boy did not change the world with wealth. He held no position. He commanded no army. He was simply a servant who trusted his Lord completely. And Allah made his trust a light that could not be extinguished. May Allah grant us hearts that remain firm upon the truth. May He bless us with sincerity in times of ease and steadfastness in times of trial. And may He gather us among those who believed in Him, remained patient for His sake, and were welcomed into His everlasting mercy. Ameen. And Allah knows best. Peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad. Peace be upon him, his family, and all of his companions. The night can feel long when the heart is waiting. Yet every trial has its measure, and every hardship its appointed end. If you are carrying a burden tonight, may Allah strengthen your patience and reward your perseverance. Rest now, and trust that dawn arrives by His command. Until our next story, rest in the remembrance of Allah. And remember, true tears drift gently with night dews. Assalamu alaikum.